Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 2, Hippias Minor 363a. Last time I explained why we call the dialogue Hippias Minor, but I didn't actually say why it was called Hippias altogether. In the ancient world, the dialogues were circulated on papyrus rolls, either one roll per dialogue. Some of the short dialogues could have been on one papyrus roll. The very long dialogues would have been on several papyrus rolls. We don't know if Plato gave his dialogues titles, but it became common practice to refer at least to the early dialogues, the short ones, by the name of Socrates' interlocutor. So that's why this is called Hippias. In the 1st century AD, about 350 years after Plato wrote the dialogues, the court astrologer of the emperor Tiberius, Thrasyllus, who's an Alexandrian Greek, gave each dialogue a subject. So he would call this dialogue, for example, about lying, because there is lying in the dialogue. But we shouldn't automatically jump to the conclusion that Plato thought that the dialogue was about lying. That is, it's not necessarily the main subject of the dialogue. That's why we call it Hippias, and now we know why it's Hippias Minor, because it's the shorter of the two dialogues called Hippias. And I should explain why I called this first part 363a. All the dialogues were collected and edited in the modern world by a French editor, publisher called Henri Estienne, or Etienne, in the 16th century. Etienne is the French word for a crown, and it comes from the Greek word Stephanos. Because scholars and scientists in Western Europe tended to write in Latin, Etienne referred to himself as Stephanos. He collected and edited all of the dialogues of Plato in 3 volumes. On each page there would be a column of Greek text, and facing that on the same page a column of Latin translation. Each column was divided into 5 sections, which we refer to as A, B, C, D, and E. The dialogue Hippias Minor begins on page 363, which is why I stated that we are beginning at Hippias 363a, the first section. But the problem is page 363 appears 3 times because there are 3 volumes. So if we say Hippias 363, that's all right, because we know that Hippias is in volume 1. But if I didn't say Hippias at all, I would have to say volume 1, page 363. If I want to be more exact and talk about a line number within the section, we use the Oxford edition by John Burnet from the beginning of the 20th century, where the text isn't in 2 columns on 1 page. It's a normal text, so the lines are fewer because they're longer. Burnet himself uses the Stephanos pages and sections, but we use his lines for numbering the lines. So we're beginning our reading of the dialogue at Hippias 363a1. In modern texts and translations, we are told the name of the speaker straight away, but in Plato's time, it was customary not to say who was speaking, and we find out who the speaker is by the address to that speaker by his interlocutor. So we have to wait a bit until we find out who the speaker is, or we would have done. We know that the first speaker is Eudicus. The name Eudicus means something like a man of good judgment, but it doesn't really matter. For Plato, the degma is a historical figure that he's chosen to represent his paradigma. What is interesting is that in scholarly literature, Eudicus is hardly ever mentioned because he is philosophically irrelevant. There are two paradoxes in the dialogue which are of interest to philosophers, and everything else is redundant. Even Wikipedia, which does mention Eudicus, doesn't really have much to say about him. So it's going to be interesting to see what we can get out of the dialogue. So let's start. Sudede, ti sigaso, Socrates. But you, why are you quiet, Socrates? Already we see two things. Eudicus is asking a question. He's asking Socrates, and we're not at the beginning of a conversation. It is the beginning of the conversation with Socrates. Socrates has been quiet until now, and Eudicus asks him why. It is unusual for Socrates to be quiet, so that's a good question. Eudicus explains why it's unusual now. Hippiu tosauta epidexamenu. Hippias having exhibited so many things. We already learned from this that Hippias exhibits, and this is something that sophists do. So we learned that it's important in this dialogue that Hippias is a sophist. A sophist, first of all, we need to know what a sophist is. A sophist is someone who teaches Sophia. It's usual to translate Sophia nowadays as wisdom, but it's actually expertise. So a sophistes is an expertician. An expertician, you may well ask, an expert in what? And this shows how stupid the word is. A sophist is someone who teaches expertise, and it doesn't actually say which expertise. We could say that a sophist teaches people to appear to be expert in things, which is quite accurate, but may not be what they would like us to think. One subject common to all sophists is rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion. Hippias is no exception. He can teach rhetoric, but he's just exhibited so many things that it's pretty obvious that he's an expert on more than just rhetoric. An exhibition is where a sophist advertises himself. He shows people what he's capable of, and the audience is supposed to be impressed by his show, his display, and afterwards some of the richer members of the audience, usually young aristocratic men, will consider registering for a course. The poor old man Socrates obviously isn't considering registering for a course, and it's interesting therefore that Eudicus still wonders why he hasn't said anything. After asking why Socrates is quiet, Eudicus carries on with his question, Kai uchi eisune painesti ton eremenon, e kai elenches etisoi me kalos doke erikenai. So why are you quiet? And it is not the case either that you co-praise something of the things said, or even refute or question or examine if something seems to you to have been said not finely. So Eudicus expected Socrates either to co-praise, in other words, praise Hippias along with the others. So we've found out that there are others, and all they've been doing is praising Hippias. Or, alternatively, why isn't Socrates doing what he usually does, which is to cross-examine people? This is an interesting question. It's interesting that Eudicus is the one asking. If I'm correct, Eudicus belongs to the group of young aristocrats who are interested in registering for a course with Hippias, and Eudicus therefore does know Socrates. Everyone knows everyone in Athens, and he surely doesn't expect Socrates to praise, and there would be no need to make Socrates praise Hippias. What's the point? Everyone else has been praising Hippias. So it seems that Eudicus would like Socrates to cross-examine Hippias. And then Eudicus adds an interesting remark: especially as we have been left behind, those who would most profit from participating in time spent in philosophy. I'm being polite in saying time spent. The word he uses is diatribe, which means wearing away, and in terms of time, time wasting, time spent in not doing proper work. So diatribe in philosophy. So Eudicus thinks that if Socrates asks Hippias about some point that Hippias made in his exhibition, this would be philosophy, and the people who have been left behind would profit from that. Among other things, standing around not working because you're talking to a teacher you have paid is a good case of conspicuous consumption. You're showing that you're an aristocrat. Socrates obliges. Kai meno Eudike estige ha hedeos anputhoimen hippiu honunde elegen peri Homeru. Indeed, Eudicus, there are some things I would gladly ask of Hippias, of the things he was speaking about just now, about Homer. So now we learn that among the things Hippias exhibited were things about Homer. What's more important here, Eudicus asked Socrates either to praise or to cross-examine. And what Socrates is offering is to ask Hippias for more information. This isn't cross-examining as such. This is just asking for more information about what he was saying about Homer. So we can look forward to a conversation about Homer in the next episode.